Hey, everybody. Welcome to Distorted. We're going to do our best here to talk about mental health in a way that's not so dry and boring that you don't want to listen. So the idea here is bring up mental health, try to make it simpler to understand, maybe get rid of some of the myths, maybe identify some of the issues that are, in society now that are affecting everybody. Things that would you could ask questions about. Obviously, we want that interaction with you. So if any topic that we talk about on Distorted is of an interest to you, let us know, and we will respond to you in the comments. So my name's Lenny. This is Distorted. My co-host today is Dr. Sonja Sollenberger, a.k.a. my wife. And so today we're going to talk about something, it's not brand new news, but it's been around. People talking about the increase in mental health exposure, people seeking out mental health treatment, and then it not corresponding to less mental health issues in society. So in other words, more people go into therapy, but not necessarily getting better. And so you find this increase in, well, you think what therapy's for is for people to get better. Mm-hmm. And they go to therapy with the idea that they're going to get better. But the data is saying that that's not necessarily the case. And every generation, from X to millennial to Z, we're seeing increases in people claiming that they have depression or anxiety. Those are the top two. But other things, trickled into that. And then the question becomes, if people are seeking out therapy and it's supposed to help, why isn't it? Mm-hmm. And so hopefully today, Sonja and I are going to talk about some of those reasons to make more sense out of it. What are the variables that might cause both things to be true, that there are more people seeking out therapy, but there's still an increase in people who are claiming experiences with some form of mental health, essentially.
Right.
Yeah. So let me get us started. Part of the interest that I have in this is I, like many of you, I watch different podcasts and different people talk about mental health. Some people who are in the field, some people who aren't. For those that don't know Daily Wire, there's a guy named Matt Walsh, very intelligent guy. He's the one that did that, those documentaries, What is a Woman and Am I Racist? They're very, very funny. But he talks about therapy being kind of, and I don't want to misquote him, but in general terms, not as effective as what it claims to be, and maybe not even necessary. And so out of respect for that conversation, I kind of want to respond to some of that, saying up front that, yeah, I would have a bias because as a mental health provider, I do believe that the process works. I do believe that there's validity to the process. And so I say that up front that, yes, I have a bias because it is something that I do. But we're going to kind of go through some of the variables and maybe break some of these things down to say, why do we think, as two people in the field, why do we think that even though there's an increase in exposure to ways to get better, why aren't people getting better?
Right.
So just to start us off, kind of what's your feelings about that idea?
To start us off, there's a proliferation of mental health counseling through the internet, and it's advertised on TV, and that's amazing. But those therapists aren't necessarily always the most qualified. So it's better to go to therapy than not, obviously, but it's better to find someone who's qualified and done it and experienced in the field rather than just try to find someone online that's easy so that you don't have to leave your house.
And that brings up, again, that's just how complicated this is. Even just with that first response, it brings up lots of ideas. Easy access to mental health because you don't have to leave your home. You don't necessarily have to prep for that. You press a couple of buttons, you set up the Zoom session, and then you're talking to a therapist. And from both ends of this, we can start off by talking about the idea of the faster access to mental health doesn't necessarily mean that it's better, right? That's what you're kind of saying, and that,
yes.
And that you can have somebody qualified online, but let's talk about the restrictions of virtual therapy, right? So from a clinician's perspective, we can both speak to this. And the article talks about it. It's in The Hill. That's the article that Matt Walsh was referencing in some of the podcasts that he did, was he was referencing The Hill, where it said virtual therapy is on the increase, especially since COVID. That was part of the landmark.
Right.
Someone on a TV screen, you don't get the same body language. You don't get the full pathology, right? And this is going to sound funny, guys, for those that aren't in this line of work, but it's everything, right? It's the look of the person, the body language, the smell of the person, right? You don't get that over the screen. So these are all things that we would take into consideration when someone is with us. And additionally, online, the distractions that are there, you are in your home, which means you're more comfortable. But do people really take the time to eliminate all the distractions? Your children, your pets, sounds, phone calls, anything else that might happen in your home environment. Are you distracted? And maybe I'll have you speak on this part of it from a therapeutic model. Those things, how would those things disrupt the therapeutic process? And then again, make your therapy not quite as sufficient or accurate. Do you want to talk on that, and then we can unpack some of these other things?
Sure. I think they say like 80 or 90% of communication is body language and tone of voice. And you miss the body language, those little nuances when it's over a computer screen. Right. And you're not in front of the person seeing the direct eye contact. Are they slumped down in a chair? Are they sitting up? Do they have their arms crossed?
Yeah.
Are they anxious? Are they into what you're saying? Are they just going through, making it seem like they get it, but they're not really with you?
Yeah. And so, when we talk about the pathology of somebody who's avoidant, someone who's guarded, someone who's restricted, someone who is emotionally not reactive to things and maybe doesn't know how to express those things properly, would you deem that easier or harder through a lens?
Harder.
Yeah. Maybe let's talk about that a little bit too. So, sometimes you're doing therapy and we've had to do this online at times. You just get a face. So you have no idea if there's an anxious reaction anywhere else in the body, because you're not seeing it. You're just seeing their face. And sometimes it's at a bad angle, or, they're walking around while they're talking to you. And so clearly if you're walking around, you have some distraction because you're not going to walk into furniture and this type of thing. I think all of that affects, okay, so if I have somebody in front of me and I'm trying to guide them through a process, they've got any number of things to cause them to miss something I said,
right? To
mishear something I said, let alone bad connection, let alone, the Wi-Fi pops in and out and you freeze halfway through a sentence. So if a client is listening to a therapeutic modality idea and it gets disrupted, what kinds of side effects would that have maybe on a client, do you think?
It's definitely going to impact the therapeutic relationship. And the therapeutic rapport is, again, I don't know the percentage, but that's a big part of a client getting better.
I'd put it up at 80%.
Sure. Yeah. The bond and that therapeutic back and forth is paramount to the person leaving with some sense of, okay, I didn't just get information, but I have a relationship which then informs my future relationships and will help me in that kind of way. Yeah.
And so if I'm speaking devil's advocate, I can hear the voice of someone who doubts the process would say, well, if it's about rapport, well, you could talk to a friend or you could talk to anybody if it's just rapport building that causes the therapeutic thing to take place. And I believe that when Matt Walsh talked to Jordan Peterson about this is one of the topics that came up was the therapist offers a neutral perspective, non-emotional, not involved in the emotional content that a person who knows you and cares about you would. Not to get too far off on a topic, but ADD is a terrible thing to waste. Dual relationship is one of the blockers to a therapeutic rapport, that you cannot create a therapeutic relationship with somebody when the relationship exists on another level. So the idea that the rapport could translate to a friend or to another listening ear is not necessarily true, because the neutrality is missing. Just like I can claim my own bias as someone who's in therapy that thinks therapy works if it's done appropriately and accurately, versus if it's just rapport. We're saying it's a huge part of it, but if it's just rapport, you could talk to anybody and get better. Okay, well, so to a certain degree, that's true, but you're not taking into consideration that if I'm talking to one of my friends, I'm their friend before I'm a therapist. I'm their aunt, or I'm their uncle, or I'm their best friend, or I'm whatever I am. I'm that before I'm someone who they're going to listen to for a therapeutic idea.
There's no objectivity.
That's right. And then that's bias that's created. So the rapport alone, although it's important, we're saying it's important, I look at the rapport, if you agree or disagree on this, you can tell me, but I view the rapport as the platform at which the techniques can be used, and for the client to be more apt to adhere to that and find it motivating to want to change.
Yes. And in addition to that, it helps us understand our relationship with others, which is often why we're in therapy in the first place.
This is a good point.
We're not just living on our own in a bubble.
Right.
We're interacting with people. We listen to people. We get offended. We get upset. We personalize things that we shouldn't. And having an actual person in front of you who can respond and who can observe how you tend to answer things. What's your pattern?
Right.
Do you get really defensive? Those are things that influence the content of also what you're saying.
Yeah, and I think that's huge what you just said. It's the technique side of it. When I hear a client say something, I'm responding to that. I'm even role modeling an example of a relationship with them when they're sitting with me, right? So that idea, that's not necessarily easily replicated by just anyone. So there is something to be said for the technique that gets added to this. It's not just a friendship conversation. I mean, heck, your friends, you can say all kinds of cruel things to a friend because the presentation's completely different. There are rules and boundaries around what you do in a therapy session to help a client feel comfortable enough to work on themselves.
Listen, if friendship was sufficient alone, we wouldn't have these mental health problems.
We would work through a lot more of them, yeah.
Right? But
So-
it's not sufficient by itself.
No. And so then we can add in some of these other variables based on what you just said there. You take a chunk of time, and obviously this is going to take a long time to discuss. We might have to do a second hour on this type of thing, but you take a COVID thing where you are removed from social engagement that you normally would have, or you were a person who was already shy or introverted, and now on top of that, you have a reason not to reach out and talk to anybody. You have this double down on this idea that you're not mirroring off anybody. You're not learning from anyone else's perspective. You're not seeing other people's responses. It even goes all the way back to when they're children. You know, play therapy, play in itself is a way for little children to start to learn what is appropriate social behavior versus what is not, right? So there's many levels to this where part of how you respond interpersonally, and a lot of what we see in therapy is people with interpersonal struggle.
Yes.
So this idea that you'd be learning from that reflective and reframing and all that other stuff that we try to do in therapy, sure, there's a benefit to that. And again, like you said, if it was happening naturally, if it could happen naturally, if you could take the bias out of it, maybe there would be less need for therapy. But again, I want to be careful that we're not saying that everyone needs to go to therapy, and certainly you don't want it to be a crutch thing. But my thing goes back to the original premise, which is, why would mental health increase even though people are seeking out therapy? So we'll segue a little bit into maybe specifically addressing why it is that therapy would be ineffective without getting, I don't want to hurt any feelings out there in the world of therapy, but maybe we start touching on some of that.
Remember the thing that you always mention when you do your talks with people, and you say, a lot of people nowadays just watch on TV what it's like to go to Hawaii instead of actually going to Hawaii.
Right.
I mean, that's a perfect example of what you're talking about. It's very different thinking about it or doing it rather than being in person and seeing it.
Yeah, and so we could translate that to this idea of the therapist being able to create the role of a healthy relationship, one with boundaries, one with limits, one with respect, one with, the intention of non-harm, of validating, of listening, representing that to somebody so that when they take it into their personal lives, when they go to Hawaii, they have a practical way of navigating that experience, the actual experience, not just what they think it is based on an image that they saw or based on a presentation of it. I think that that's the idea, is that why would therapy not necessarily be effective? Well, virtual therapy, you're missing out on some of the value of doing therapy. You're missing out on some of the connection. Yeah. Some of the connecting pieces aren't there. Even having a conversation with somebody via, I've done many things on Zoom, like a speaking engagement in person versus on Zoom. Zoom eliminates the interaction because you don't pick up on the pause. You don't pick up on the look. You don't pick up on, because you can't. Depending on if the camera's on or off, right? You're missing 50% of the interaction. And so I think that that's one of the reasons why, although people could absolutely be helped by virtual therapy, there are other groups of people, my opinion, my biased opinion, more people that are not getting what they want out of therapy because it's not in person. So let's jump to another one, because I don't want to just focus on that.
Okay.
Let's talk about what social media has done with, let's say, self-diagnosing. Let's talk about that a little bit, because this is another reason why therapy gets diluted.
Right.
Like we can talk about it through the perspective of self-diagnosing or the self-medicating, or all those types of things, if you want to.
Right. You can read about terms and definitions and have someone speak about it online. But that's so brief, that's so short, and you're not getting into all the nuances of your particular relationship. What challenges are you having in your life that you need to work through? A snippet on social media doesn't do it justice.
No. And if the snippet's coming from someone with no background in it because they read something, they're basically third-personing you, a therapeutic, digest. Finding a DSM and website and reading off criteria for a disorder. This is the one that I see a lot, right? The person who's telling you the criterion is not someone who's in the field to begin with. I don't want to get tax advice from someone who doesn't know anything about money. That's not how I want to do. I don't want to, buy property from some. This is the same thing we talk about. Like you're going to sell property or buy property. I want someone who knows something about it. Sometimes these flippers are just that. They're flippers. You put paint over dirt, it's just painted dirt. It doesn't make the house new and clean. It's just, they just painted it. They put up new drywall, and whatever was behind that drywall is still back there festering. That's not good. That's not good resale to me, but I'm being hyperbolic for a reason. If I get the criterion read to me, of course, much like the NyQuil commercial, if you remember the old days where it said it's nighttime sleeping, sneezing, coughing, so you can rest medicine, and then they would tell you the side effects afterwards. Anybody can either look at the good part of the medicine or the side effects of the medicine and say, oh yeah, I've had those. That's not enough. It's not enough to say that you like being around people, so that makes you codependent. You crave emotional content, so now all of a sudden you have a borderline personality. You're proud of yourself for an accomplishment, all of a sudden you're a narcissist personality. Come on. So it's more complicated than that. Right. But if I'm just reading it out of and just for the Christian folk listening, because I'm not, there's no getting around that. This is the premise of what we do around here is that we do emphasize God in what we do, but we'll get to that in a moment. But this idea that a person who's confident, a person who is confident enough to try something new or step into a new thing or believe that they can have some success, a lot of the tenets of faith left unhumbled by the idea that they're not coming from God to you, through you, that you self-manifest, would make you think someone was narcissistic in their background based on just pure criterion. But the difference is that I'm not taking credit for the giftings that I have or the ability that I have. I'm saying that God provided me with something and is opening doors for me to step into if I'm willing to risk it. The idea that I would fail still exists. It doesn't mean that I'm immune to any kind of harm or suffering. It means that I have access to something that helps me get through that. So if I was driving those things and I felt like my poop didn't stink and I could do no wrong, right? and I'm in charge of everything I'm doing. That's kind of narcissistic. He doesn't, he's taking credit for everything. I don't take credit independently of what I've been provided by God. And so, again, how would you know that? I'm not going to say that in a casual conversation with somebody on the street. By the way, God gave me all this. Okay, let's have a conversation. But it might, go ahead.
Let me just go back to this whole idea of self-diagnosing with labels.
Right.
It's a place to start, right? Looking online, getting some runny nose, sniffing, sneezing, getting the basic symptoms. But that's not the only way you get better.
Right.
There are a lot of ingredients to getting better. Relationship, boundaries, time management. There's a bunch of different things. And I think that's also a piece people are missing, is when they're just looking for a label and they're looking for that shortcut, that quick fix, because it's hard to do the work. It's a lot of time intensivity to do the work. But you can't just take a shortcut. You've got to find someone that you can delve into these things with.
Yeah, each disorder is different and each person's different. So you've got a bunch of variables that you can't account for. There's no cut and paste.
No.
There's never been cut and paste when it comes to mental health.
And no one size fits all.
No, not when it comes to mental health. I mean, again, a broken arm is a broken arm. I might have to fix the bone, put a cast on it, do my 6 weeks in cast, and then do rehab afterwards. Mental health is a lot more diverse than that. It's intricate to the person, the environment, the culture, the background. You have to be able to take things into consideration to help somebody deal with their specific symptoms. So self-diagnosing, let's touch on that. You mentioned a very important part of this, and it's affecting young people. This is, again, we see the rise in the Z generation and now probably the alphas too, where they're seeking out more assistance through mental health. They're not as stigmatized by it, but they're labeling themselves prematurely. I want to know what this is. I want you to tell me what it is that I have. I want you to give it a name so I can call it something so then I know. And that's not necessarily needed. It's not necessarily needed for you to label something in order to deal with it or manage it. I'll go back to anxiety. I mean, we just had a thing about that a couple nights ago where we talked about anxiety with a group of people. Everyone has some form of anxiety, little pieces of it. And some people, it's effective to the point where it may make them dysfunctional. But not everyone has to be labeled with an anxiety disorder or social anxiety. If you're not familiar with going out into public situations, let alone going into a public situation and then speaking or entertaining, that's not a thing that everyone just does and plops themselves into and says, this is what I want to be the center of attention. That's not a thing that happens. Some people enjoy watching or being quiet or having conversations with 1 or 2 people as opposed to 12 people or more. These are nuances, things that need to be normalized, that you all of a sudden don't have social anxiety because you don't want to be loud in a public situation. That's not your personality. You don't care to do that.
But they often want to, at least initially, reduce that anxiety by saying, oh, this is what I have.
Right.
This is what's happening, and this tells me if I do A, B, and C, I'll get help and I'll get better. And when that doesn't happen, then the mental health issues continue.
Yeah. And if and again, there's so much to talk about, but if I start putting medication before therapy or work, you can get a medication from your primary care physician, ironically called the PCP. You can get medication from them. It doesn't necessarily mean you need it or it's going to be effective. The doctor's going to try to be there for you and do what you need to do. And you can get an anti-anxiety or antidepressant medicine from just about anybody. But, excuse me a second. But I think you have to be wary of that. The medication is designed to platform you so you can do work. So you can do work without the medication, but if you just take the medication and do no work, you aren't getting better. There's a physical reaction to the medication because that's what it does. It goes into the system and changes things. You might physically feel something different, but you haven't actually applied, how am I going to do it better?
Right. And it's a start again.
It's a start, but
it's a start.
Maybe the opposite start.
And you always want to at least start with therapy first to see, will this talk therapy or some kind of therapy help me before then moving to other methods? Because once you start doing that, it gets complicated, and you do want someone who can manage your medication. You don't want to be doing that on your own. It's not safe.
No, and you know, and it's like anything else. If you're exposed to a therapeutic relationship, you're exposed to a therapeutic medicine, and you don't do it based on how it's supposed to be used, the appropriate usage, right? You go to therapy once and then you quit. That's not an appropriate use of therapy.
Right.
You take your medicine, but you only take it when you want to take it, or you take it more than you're supposed to take it. You know, these things affect the nature of the medicine. I'll give you a great example. Is a lot of times I'd have people come in and tell me that they started an antidepressant. Well, the typical saturation medicine takes 3 to 4 weeks for it to get to therapeutic level, but they'll tell you they feel better a week and a half in, 2 weeks in. So we know something else is happening for that person, you know, whether or not that's placebo or not. I mean, but I'm not trying to make, I'm just saying the totality of the experience. You can have a diet fail is you didn't follow what the diet said, and you have to permanently change something about yourself in order for it to permanently stick. So it's not, the idea being is that even if you went to therapy, this is kind of what I'm getting at, even if you went to therapy, you did 6 to 8 sessions or 10 sessions or maybe 3 months worth, 5 months, whatever it was, you did a half a year, you did a whole year. When you leave therapy, the idea, at least in my mind, if I'm wrong, you correct me, that you're going to then do that work after therapy itself ends. And so the personal responsibility exists regardless of what you do. If it's a diet, if it's working out, if it's anything like that, the maintenance of it is up to the individual.
Yes. And what happens when you're talking about medication, pharmaceutically and chemically, it gets in our system and it starts working. But it takes that 2, 3, 4 weeks to start seeing a change in our behavior.
Right.
Which is what we're talking about. Sustaining change is about seeing changes not just biologically, but you want to see the change behaviorally.
Right. I mean, even a laxative has a timeline. So anyways.
Thank God.
Yeah. So, you know, again, I think there's a fair critique in some of the stuff that Matt Walsh had said, that we know, you and I know, systematically there is a lean towards affirmation versus confrontation in our field, which has a lot of controversy around it. So the therapeutic community has lost sight of some of the value of confronting in a healthy way what the client thinks about themselves and what they're trying to accomplish. So his critique on that, I think he said something along those lines. There is something, I don't believe that, and of course it's not, no field is immune to this, of someone being deceptive or out of line, that there probably is some unethical therapy out there where someone would keep somebody as a client because of the income that comes from the client. I just think that's super rare. I don't think that's a thing across the board. I would never do that. Ethically, it's all about the therapeutic. If there's nothing therapeutic that we're working on, I will graduate the client for themselves if I have to. But this idea that there is some accountability that has to take place, and I agree with him on that we've gotten off our step a little bit as far as, you know, when I'm guiding somebody through that it's not all, you know, smiley and happy, that there's some confrontation that has to take place in order to help the client challenge some of the concepts. I tell clients all the time, you didn't come to me to stay the same. You didn't need me. You don't need me for that. So obviously there's time to validate and listen to what is happening with that person, but there's also a time when that has to be confronted and processed. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I do. And the thing you were talking about before with a therapist keeping a client in therapy too long, I mean, that's a whole other topic, right?
Yeah.
Like malpractice, malfeasance, right? But, and then you would want a different therapist, and you might need to get healing from that therapist. But tell me again what your thought was.
That you know, this idea that confrontation has to happen because the processing is as important, some cases, as the validation.
Yes.
Because obviously you don't just always confront the client. There's validation involved too.
Right. There's an acceptance that comes along with our issues, that accepting what's happening is important. Affirming what's happening is important.
Of course.
Right. But you're not coming just to stay the same and to stay stuck. You want to develop. You want to grow.
Yeah.
You don't want to keep doing the same patterns because you're going to be in the same place as when you started.
And if the thing that the client is insisting on doing is causing the problem for them, you have to process that. You have to address it. So I give him credit for that type of challenge. He has a lot of good points when he challenges that idea with it. It's that specific to him, though, he's a very unique individual. He's he's amazing when it comes to being able to compartmentalize what he's experiencing, which is why he was able to do what he did, because he could keep a straight face when most of us would not be able to do it. That's an amazing skill set.
In that movie we saw.
Yeah, that's not a translatable skill set. I was laughing watching what he did. There's no way I could have taken his spot and not just lost myself to it. That's a unique ability. That's not translatable to a lot of people. Right. I understand for him personally why therapy wouldn't be all that great for him. I could see why he wouldn't need it personally. He's just got that natural ability.
He doesn't need the back and forth.
Not a guy like that. He's very grounded in his approach. That's not something you can I bet he's already thought about it. If he could put it in a bottle, he'd be even well off more than he is. I mean, if he could put that in a bottle, that way he approaches things, not everybody can do that. No. That's just not a thing that everyone can do. No. So again, I do give him credit for the critique of, like I said, we've lost our way a little bit. There's way too much placating to people, not challenging them, things that are harming them, and us just saying, again, when you don't tell people what to do. But if somebody comes to me with something that is disrupting them, and again, as we go on with this podcast, we're going to talk a lot about distortions in a lot of different areas. That's going to be an underlying theme for this, is that I want to point out how prevalent distorted thinking is. There's over 20 varieties of mental mistakes that we make that cause distortion. We're going to touch all those as we move forward with this. But with this particular topic, the bottom line, I think, is what I want to get across to everybody is that, yes, you can go to therapy, and yes, it may not adhere, but part of the ownership of that is not that necessarily therapy is useless or bad, because there are good attorneys and bad attorneys. There are good therapists and there are bad therapists. The good news is you get to shop around until you find one that you click with.
And it's important, if you have a bad experience, keep trying.
Of course.
Go to someone else, find someone else, ask other people what their experiences have been. Unfortunately, you might have a bad experience, but don't stop trying.
Right.
You have to keep going and look for someone else who is a better fit.
Better fit for you. And then the flip side of that is that you entering into therapy, you have to work. You have to go in. I tell clients, again, I have 1 hour, you have 6 days, 23 hours. You win. You win every time. I can't compete with whatever you're going to do. That's huge to this, because again, if a client comes in expecting you to be the magic, that's not that's not therapy.
That's not life.
That's not even life, but that's not therapy. Therapy is not, let me tell you what to do for an hour and then, go do it. I don't want them dependent on my information to go do what they got to do. I want them to come to a solution that changes how they approach problems. Certainly, I can help them identify the types of things that might cause those problems, but it's up to them to decide which ones apply to them. And so I think that's a breakdown in part of this. If I'm a young person locked into a social media world with quick fix-its and short-term ADD kind of promoted behavior, which for boys can be very detrimental, the expectation that you're going to get better the same way if you had a solid sit-down in-person conversation and actually applied yourself to it, those two things are way different. Do you read the book when you're in school, or do you get the Cliff Notes like we used to do back in the day? Nowadays, they do it online. They got Chat GPT telling them what the answers are. That's different than reading the material, taking notes, which we had to do. We didn't have a choice. There was no, hey, let's go ask the computer what he thinks. We didn't have that, okay? But to sit and read the book and to take notes and to look at the notes and to process the notes. That type of learning is different than chatty chat McChatty, tell me what it is I'm supposed to think here. Right. And then it tells you.
Right.
That's different. There's not the same connection, and you're not using yourself in the same way mentally to get to your answer.
And you're not learning skills about how to get better at it next time. You're more likely to stay where you're at, whatever level that is, because someone else is feeding you that information.
Yeah. And we can go back to the medical example. You know, you put a Band-Aid on something, but the body's going to do natural healing under the Band-Aid. Mm-hmm. You put a cast on a broken arm. 6 weeks later, the cast is coming off. The bone is no longer broken, but it is not at capacity. It has to be rehabilitated to get to the strength that it had before the break. Right. That's work. That's effort. You go in and get your arm manipulated. I remember when I got a metal plate in my wrist. I remember going through the rehab. I couldn't bend my wrist the same way as my other one. I had to go through physical rehabilitation to work back up. And it wasn't happening in the hour that the person had me in physical therapy. That person was simply getting me worked up to where I could understand how far to push, right? Mm-hmm. Same thing with my ACL when I tore my ACL. Going home and having to do the work at home was very difficult and painful. I mean, you know, we're not going to tell that whole story, but you remember I cried going up the stairwell the whole way. And you said, well, you got to get up there because I ain't going to lift you up there. It was pretty funny, but it's like I had to work myself up those stairs, as painful as that was. And I was crying the whole way up because we'd just gotten home from the hospital. That experience gave me permission to trust myself to do that again, to continue to work again, to continue to get better. Mental health is very similar in that way.
And try to avoid getting hit by a car.
Sure. You don't want to do that. But okay, so kind of tying all this together, in my opinion, therapy works, number one, if you do it, because there's a valid reason to do it, and you take the time enough to find someone you have rapport with, so while you're learning new things, you feel strong enough to apply them to your life.
Yes.
What would you like to say about that idea of, listen, it does work if you do it appropriately, but of course, that doesn't mean it's universal. It's not 100%.
Right. And just, we briefly hit on it before, but if you have a bad experience, you have to keep trying. Or you've had family or friends tell you negative things that might scare you from trying therapy, scare you from trying to enter into something new because you've had negativity around that.
Yeah.
So it's important to challenge yourself. Again, use that word challenge. Yep. Challenge yourself enough to try again and to try until you find a good fit with someone. Don't get discouraged if it doesn't work the first or second time. That happens to all of us, even with medical teachers, high school teachers. You didn't click with all of them.
No.
Some were awful and some were great, and the great ones you remember to this day.
Sure. And the different types of therapy, which we don't have really time to touch on that too much, but the different types of therapy, you have to find the type of therapy, for people with trauma backgrounds that want to work through trauma when it's really debilitating, there's a thing called EMDR that's very effective. There's hypnosis, other things you can try except for, other than just straight talk therapy. But you look around, you do your research, you find the therapy that works for you. If you're faith-based, you might want to find somebody who can integrate faith. You might want that. So again, the type of therapy that you seek out, that's also a part of this. It's not one size fits all.
No.
Okay. Yeah, one other thing I'll just say about that, just real quick, and then I promise we'll be done for today, guys. And I appreciate everybody joining us. The idea behind therapy being ineffective, yes, it's not just the therapy that's responsible. So my short answer is yes, therapy can be ineffective. Just like diet and exercise, if you don't do it consistently with maintenance and appropriately. There's funny videos of people all over the internet doing workouts that aren't workouts, doing curls with the wrong direction, or, because they haven't actually learned how to appropriately do that particular exercise or the diet that they're using. So, but to say that therapy is ineffective because of these cases that you can point out where someone didn't get better, I don't think that that's the case. I do think there's good therapists out there. I do think that therapy is a great way for people to interpersonally grow, And so more time needs to be spent on this, and we will in later episodes. But thank you to Sonja.
Yes.
And I appreciate all of you watching. We're going to try to put out at least one video a week. If, resources that you need, feel free to ask questions in the comments. Like I said, we'll be happy to answer those types of things. Look forward to continuing sessions, and hopefully you guys will let me know what you want to hear about, and we'll talk about it. Thanks, everybody.
Good job.